Okay, good morning. Many thanks to the few and faithful who turned out after what I understand was kind of a wild night last night. This is the fourth and final panel of the 2025 Ellen Van Volkenburg Puppetry Symposium series, and we are delighted to have Dr. Dassia N. Posner as our moderator once again. She is an award-winning theater historian, translator, dramaturg, and puppeteer. She is Associate Professor of Theater and Slavic Languages and Literatures at Northwestern University. Her books include The Director's Prism, E.T.A. Hoffman and the Russian Theatrical Avant-Garde, that's from 2016, The Rutledge Companion to Puppetry and Material Performance, co-edited in 2014, and Three Loves for Three Oranges, Gossi, Meyerhold, and Prokofiev, 2021 co-edited, which won the 2022 American Society for Theater Research Translation Prize. Recent creative work includes dramaturgy and translation work for Chekhov's Seagull at Steppenwolf Theater Company and a co-directed giant puppet spectacle, The Flight of the Phoenix. Please give a warm welcome to Dr. Posner.
Hello, hello. Hello, is it on? Yay! Yes, it is? Okay, fabulous, fabulous. Thank you everyone for coming today on a Sunday morning. Welcome to the fourth session of this year's Ellen Van Volkenburg Symposium. Special thanks to Paulette Richards and Blair Thomas and all of the other amazing puppetry folks here for organizing and celebrating these conversations. Today's event focuses on, loosely, the image aspect of the puppet. That's a theme that's inspired by a book by Claudia Ornstein that we talked about as part of last year's festival. And she's interested in how you design the movement of an object or you design the function of an object versus how you design how the object looks and how those things work together. So loosely we're talking about that, but it I think naturally relates to the work of everyone here. I'm delighted to be in conversation with artists from several of the extraordinary companies who are featured in this year's festival. With us today we have Josh Rice, puppetry and improv artist who hails from Long Island, New York. And Josh's show with some of the additional puppeteers here was Kayfabe. If you ever desperately wanted to see puppet wrestling, this was your opportunity. The next artist that we're talking with today is Julian Crouch, who's a Brooklyn-based multimedia artist and designer and puppeteer. Don't live in Brooklyn anymore, not Brooklyn-based artist. With a show called Bird Heart that many of you, I'm sure, have seen. And then we're also talking with Chicago's own Frank Marjorie, who's the founder of Cabinet of Curiosity, and brought back the amazing show, The Cabinet, this year. After, I think it has a really sort of famous reputation in Chicago theater, so it was a real delight to see that return. Our conversation today is going to take place in three parts. In the first half, these folks will be sharing their thoughts about their work. It's an opportunity for you to have a peek behind the puppet scenes and to hear sort of what their inspirations are, how they develop these pieces, whatever else they want to talk about, other work they're working on, as well, so they're going to talk for a little while, and then in the second half, I'm going to ask questions, sort of loosely inspired by the theme of the session, but also just what I want to know. So I invite you all in the third part then, the last half hour, we'll turn it over to you. So anything that you're curious about, anything that you want to engage in more conversation about, please do ask questions. And then I also invite you to ask questions of each other and learn about each other's work. So that is the structure for today. I'm now going to turn to introducing our first puppeteer speaker, Josh Rice. Josh is a multidisciplinary theater artist specializing in puppetry and improv, which I think is a fabulous combination. He makes work that is at once playful, absurd, and tragic, incorporating simple performer-driven spectacle, puppetry, live music, improvisation, and audience interaction. His work is heavily influenced by his lifelong fandom of professional wrestling, comedy, and his training as an improviser. Kayfabe is the recipient of a 2024 Jim Henson Foundation production grant and a 2023 Jim Henson Foundation workshop grant. Josh is the founder and producing artistic director of the New York State Puppetry Festival, a biennial festival of puppetry in his rural hometown of Perry, New York. Past Chicago Puppet Fest performances, including puppeteering with Tom Lee and Koryo Nishikawa V in Akutagawa in 2023 and Shanks Mare in 2019. And if you saw Kayfabe, then you probably saw echoes of that in his Kuramenino, the cart puppet performance at the end. He also teaches at Stony Brook University. Welcome, Josh and puppeteers.
Thank you. There's a very talented puppet person in the crowd that was also in the show, Emma Wiseman. Emma Wiseman, one of the puppeteers in Kayfabe, and amazing other works. Thank you for that intro. It's so nice to be here with you all, talking about this show. Growing up in like a tiny town where there are more cows than human beings, there wasn't a ton of access to the arts, at least in my family. And I didn't really quite know what theater was, and what I thought being an artist was visual arts, which I was not particularly adept at. But one of the things that I was really drawn to was wrestling. It was one of the few things my dad and I could do together. And even as a kid, like, I remember it being absurd and ridiculous and fun and tragic and heartbreaking. And it was just kind of like this roller coaster of entertainment. And I always kind of remembered it, and I liked the physicality of it. I was never like big enough to be a real athlete of any kind. I played baseball, but that's not really athletic. Sorry. Hand-eye coordination, it's puppetry, really. But I liked using my body and physically kind of figuring out how to employ the things that I could do well. Fairly coordinated, but like football was not going to be my thing. But I would do a lot of like wrestling with my friends, and we would do backyard wrestling. And then I eventually got introduced to theater when I went to college, and stage combat became like a thing that got introduced to me. And that felt like, as soon as I tried it, I was like, oh, this is like familiar. One of those like intuitive knowing moments. And then that same thing happened to me when I went to graduate school at Sarah Lawrence College in New York, and worked with incredible puppet maestro Dan Herlin. And I took Dan's class, and it was a 3-person bunraku style class. You don't know what you don't know until you are in the room and you're trying this thing out. And a similar intuitive moment happened. I was doing it physically with other people, and we were touching one another and making this puppet come to life, and it hurt a little. And I was like, oh, I know this. Like, this is familiar. It was like that wrestling stage combat thing, all kind of talking to one another. So that is kind of how I like to move toward puppetry in this theater form, I think. And Tom Lee, another professor of mine at Sarah Lawrence at that time, now Chicago-based, part of the puppet studio here, Tom very much encouraged improv in the puppetry that I would do with him, and Koryu-san, and what a like lovely invitation to like find moments that feel like they're kind of being birthed right then and there, and to be able to incorporate that part of my life, which is the thing that I also discovered in college. Comedy, SNL was a big part of my life, and Looney Tunes cartoons and improv kind of feels like a version of that a little bit. So trying to combine all of those things is kind of my practice. And I think it was in there was a thing that happened in 2020. Oh yeah, the pandemic. And during that time, as a lot of us were, we were on a lot of Zoom calls, and I was watching wrestling growing up. I went away from it. I started watching it again with this like MFA theater lens now, and kind of looking at the Beckett absurdity of wrestling and the strange things that happen and the athleticism of it and the spectacle and the drag of it all. It's just fascinating art form to me, just endlessly fascinating. And in 2020, I was looking for a project, so I made like a self-portrait of a puppet self-portrait, basically. And it was an excuse to like build a style of puppet with mechanisms I had never really done before. And I had this like 3D printed head of me and these hands that were my hands that were scanned and then printed. So I then like built this kind of sturdy puppet with no real idea for a show for it to be used in. So the puppet came first as more like an experiment in building techniques. And I was on a lot of Zoom calls, as a lot of us were, and I felt like it was just sucking my life force. And as I would have these reveries and these work meetings for my day job, I would think about like what it would be like to be like pulled through a screen and then dropped into a world. And then it kind of like, as I was watching a lot of wrestling to pass that time where they did not have audiences, and to see a wrestling show to an empty arena is the most surreal, bizarre thing I think I can think of, because it's so predicated on audience response and involvement. So to like be pulled through a screen and dropped into the middle of a wrestling ring was the image that was in my brain. That was like how the whole show was kind of conceived, was like chasing that idea of like, what does that look like if you are completely unfamiliar with this world, and then dropped into the middle of it? How do you then become a part of that world? And the Samuel Beckett play, Act Without Words, is one of my favorite things in the whole world. And, you know, if you can then introduce objects into the world of a character that maybe aren't so friendly to him, including like wrestling world objects, a ladder, a steel chair, a table, all of these things that exist in wrestling world, but then in the context of someone who's just unfamiliar with it, what happens? And that's kind of like how the show was built and how it started, was this kind of Beckett-y exploration of this world, the surrealness of the audience aspect, and then it just kind of grew from there. And you know, the comedy parts of what inspire me, I think, also kind of bleed into the show a bit. We like to lean into dumb. And if it's could be dumber, like what's the dumbest thing? That's kind of like where we want to head sometimes. And that kind of plays itself out in the show, because I think that happens in wrestling too. There are like these moments where wrestlers oversell. So the idea of selling something is like you pretend you're hurt, so you sell it. And some of these wrestlers will like oversell sometimes. They'll get hit and they'll be stunned. And they'll just be sitting there, and they're just stunned. And then you're like, what? When is this going to end? And then it doesn't. And he continues to just be stunned. And like everyone in the arena is watching this person stunned. And it just continues. And it's like, it continues for so long that you're like, what is happening? And they just keep going, like to the point that it's like not funny, and then it becomes funny again. Like that is the kind of dumb I like. And there's some moments in the show that where we try to like really lean into that thing. And I guess like the show then started to move, because my face is the face of the puppet, I started to think a little bit more about my relationship to wrestling, and what it did for me, and inspiring, I think, a lot of the work that I make. I also was a children's theater performer, Shakespeare performer for a long while, so that's very big and physical. And I think how it connected me to my dad and my brothers was like a big part of it. So then like the show started to become like a little autobiographical, and then kind of like meta autobiographical a bit, as if I was the wrestler, or what would it look like if I wanted to become a professional wrestler? And the show kind of moves in that direction a little bit. So we play with nostalgia a lot. The puppet talks about being a kid and playing with wrestlers, which is a thing that I did, which is puppetry in a lot of ways, I think. Just that play with objects and mimicking the things that you see on television with these characters. And then trying to bring that forward, I think, in this show. So there's certainly like a bit of heart in it, but I'm never trying to like hit anybody over the head with it either. So again, you know, when we try to take you in one direction, we then quickly change and go in another direction, which is the structure of a wrestling show. There are like, it's built into segments, and there are commercials, and there are highs, and there are lows, and there's drama, and there's interviews, and there's long monologues, you know, in the middle of the ring. It's very Shakespearean, playing to the crowd being super involved. So again, all this like Shakespeare background that I have is kind of like coming through in this wrestling art form as well. So we just started constructing the show, and, you know, there was a fair amount of teaching the puppeteers all of this useless wrestling knowledge that I had, and content that I've consumed in my life. And I've read a lot of books, and like, there are scholars of wrestling. So I read a lot of their stuff. I listen to a lot of podcasts that like dissect it in these ways, where we're talking about like what's happening. And the thing of it all is none of it is real. It's a show. It's kayfabe, which is the term that they use in wrestling. It's an old carny slang for be fake. And kayfabe is this idea that we suspend our disbelief to enjoy what's happening, because we all recognize that what they're doing may not be real, because if you actually punch someone as hard as you could over and over again in the face, they could not wrestle the rest of a wrestling match. So we recognize that this is staged and that it is a scripted event. And to suspend your disbelief to enjoy it more is why we get it. The thing that everybody always says is like, you know it's not real, right? Like, of course I know it's not real. The movie that you're watching also is not real, and the television show. But yet, you know, that feels like a more accepted art form, I think, in a lot of ways. So we're playing with this idea of, can we give over to the entertainment of it? And in puppetry, the kayfabe of puppetry is, if it's done well, we can imagine that these puppeteers are invisible and are not there, and we really focus more on the object as primary. So I thought these two worlds played well together. Wrestling is also physical, and puppets do physical things really well, so that is helpful. And then this idea of kayfabe, you know, can we suspend disbelief? What's fake, what's real? And really kind of focus on the story. And then when you choose to subvert that idea and maybe make the puppeteers larger than life, like in wrestling, making the puppeteers as big as possible, make you really notice them, make them wear the most colorful things, make them have characters and entrance videos and music and theme songs and poses, and then they work on a little object. That I just find to be fascinating, duality. So that is a lot of what we were trying to explore, and to just like really lean into that world felt so fun to me. I ate a lot of bagel bites growing up, and I still know the theme song like word for word. And it felt like such an essential part of these shows when I was a kid, is like the commercials. So we also have commercials in our show. Practically, I think it just like fits into that world. It's a fun way to explore puppetry in different ways too. We have a stop motion paper commercial for a thing that we invented called Pizza Pieces, which is the Echo to Bagel Bites theme song and everything. We have a commercial of the puppeteers as selling action figures of themselves, and you can see miniature versions of the puppeteers doing that action figure commercial. There's a commercial for a thing called Meat Stick, which is our, you know, Slim Jim. So just kind of like really going as far into the world as possible. And then, you know, all these podcasts I've been consuming who talk about what's gonna happen, and it's like, who knows what the story is going to be, but they try to like analyze it like they're real sports broadcasters, and it's so funny. So to incorporate that into the show as well. There's a podcast that happens in the middle of the show that's like, what's going to happen in the fight between the puppet and the puppeteers? So it was like a real thrill and an exciting thing to be able to take these puppeteers along with me and have them trust that some of these things that feel really ridiculous and absurd could work. And to really lean into the audience involvement part, because the show really sings with the invitation to the audience that you are welcome to participate in whatever way you are moved to do so. Booing, cheering, throwing things. And they do. In Chicago, some of you saw the show, it was banana pants. The invitation was taken and ran with, and it was so fun because that energy really fuels the show in a lot of ways. It allows for more improv moments too when the audience starts to chat with us, when the little puppet is like monologuing. It's always fun to be able to interact back with the audience. So it just kind of grows in that way, and it changes and is a live thing, and I am the color commentator that is calling the in-ring action throughout the show, which again echoes back to this three-person puppetry style, rooted in Japan, that has the Gidayu, the narrator character, and then the puppetry happens on stage. So, I'm in a way kind of inspired by that. The three-person puppetry style, is happening on the show. We have music. We don't have live music, but we still have a lot of music that is composed for the show in that wrestling world. And then at the very end of the show, there's a style based on Koryu Nishikawa and Tom Lee, this cart puppetry style. And thank you very much. Thank you for that beautiful note. I appreciate it. And this cart puppet style is one which allows not three people to operate one puppet, but one person. And you stand on this cart, and there's a head piece that connects to your own head with strings. So when you turn, the puppet's head also turns, and then you're allowed to touch both hands, and then your feet are connected into your own toes with the rod. So as you sit on this wheeled cart, you can make the puppet walk on the ground and control all of its limbs. And that feels like, to me, like the most real and alive a puppet can be, with like the most limited amount of puppeteers on it. So it was a fun piece to make. I'm glad I got to incorporate a lot of these styles that I really loved and bring these people along with me, including Emma, one of the puppeteers, and audiences. So yeah, it's been a treat to make. I really, really love the piece a lot and love performing it.
Thank you so much. I might need it again. It's my 2-minute warning, in case you. It says, I love puppeteers so much. All right. Our next artist today is Julian Crouch, who performed with Saskia Lane. Together they craft poetic, visually minimalistic theater that explores human emotions with a subtle touch. Through delicate puppetry and live music, they create intimate performances that are indeed profoundly moving. Bird Heart was their festival piece, is their festival piece, and it weaves a narrative of connection and introspection and invites audiences into a world of quiet beauty. Julian is a no longer Brooklyn-based independent director, designer, writer, maker, teacher, illustrator, musician, whose career spans theater, opera, ballet, film, and television. Initially a puppet and mask maker, in the mid-90s, he co-founded London's Improbable Theatre Company, the productions of which gained international recognition. While there, he conceived and directed The Devil and Mr. Punch, and co-created and co-directed something on the other side of the page that I used for my 2-minute warning, designed the multi-award winning Shock-Headed Peter, among other projects. His work for the Metropolitan Opera has included designs for The Enchanted Island, A Merry Widow, Dr. Atomic. Other projects include Jerry Springer, the opera, and a funny thing happened on the way to the Forum for the National, Magic Flute for Welsh National Opera, and on Broadway he designed the Addams Family musical, Big Fish, Head Over Heels, and Hedwig and the Angry Inch, for which he received a Tony nomination. We're so delighted to have you today.
Hello? Hello? You totally got that off the internet, because that's not the biog I would give you. I don't know where to start. I guess I got into puppetry so I would never have to do public speaking. And that was so eloquent and clear, and I don't know, I think I sort of feel with my, we kind of live in the era of the story, like the internet story, you know, what's your story, what's your identity? I think there's a lot of pressure on us to be kind of forming who we are and how we got here. And as a kind of officially old man, I find this difficult, and I feel like, so my history of work has not followed any kind of plan. I never had a plan. I mean, I sort of had a plan that I didn't want a proper job. And I had a sort of idea of the kind of person I wanted to be, and maybe the kind of place I'd want to live, which is not Brooklyn. But I didn't really have a plan. And I think when you really don't have a plan, you kind of notice like opportunities. You notice if you have a plan, which is a plan's a good way of getting where you want to go to, but if you don't have a plan, you kind of notice little doors opening. And you know, I have a tendency to kind of walk through them. So I've sort of my career's not really gone in a straight line. And like when I was in my 20s, what I was doing, which I think now it would have been diagnosed as something, but it was seen as kind of like low attention span, you know. So I didn't really have puppet friends, but my puppet friends would do better than me because I had gone off and done something else, and all my designer friends would do better, my musician friends. So for a lot of my life has felt like that. But if you keep on doing that, by the time you become 60, then someone might call you a Renaissance man. But it's exactly the same behavior. And really that's what I'm still here doing that. I had some, I didn't know what I was going to say when I came here, but I put some slides together in my hotel room. And I can see them there, but hopefully you can see them there if they come up. I was thinking the pictures would prompt me to think of things to say. Yeah, that's not me, is it? No. I could talk about this, but it's not me.
Oh, wow, yeah, that's my other word.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Oh, I'm on the wrong folder. Yeah, how did I get that?
Oh, yes, this is me. So these are almost totally random. These are almost totally random. I thought I put Bernhardt there first because that's the show we're doing here. Bernhardt is a sort of it's sort of puppetry without a puppet in a sense, because it's like a sheet of brown paper with magnets in it, and it could have been Tom Lee, but I'm not sure. Someone said, don't work with magnets. And so we stupidly ignored that, and so we're working with paper and magnets, so we sort of ended up with a show that cannot survive the night, which is interesting because it means we have to stay engaged with it. And sometimes it's a disaster, and sometimes it's better when things go wrong. But I suppose the show is I think it's actually about 9 years old, and we're the worst producers in the world, so we don't follow up leads and stuff like that. So we sometimes don't do it for 2 years, and then we'll get a little burst of it or whatever. But it's a nice show for us to do because we're getting older and it all fits in a case and plays on a table. I think companies are always trying to do that, but very soon that table becomes a van, and then it becomes 2 trucks. And, you know, this is meant to be a puppet show. Look at the size of this set. But so it's a nice show as far as that goes, but a very short show. It's funny playing it in a puppet festival because I think normally we go to places, we often are not playing theaters, we're often playing like rooms, or the puppet bit's only 25 minutes long. And so usually I think we're a really unusual thing to turn up in town, but of course you come to a puppet festival and everyone's doing weird, unusual things. It's kind of strange, but this, like, I think I put this up because it had a picture of me and it had a picture of Punch, I guess. This is probably like the first. Punch is obviously like, I imagine most people know Punch and Judy here. It's better known in Britain, so this is the kind of thing certainly I was born in the 60s and we were brought up, you know, with kind of seaside sort of Punch things. Lots of wrestling, you know, lots of violence. Maybe just put the next one on, I don't know. Oh, this is, I thought I'd show a bit of scale here. So this is Satyagraha, Philip Glass opera that was at the Met Opera and the E&O, and it's traveled a lot, not Chicago. These are interesting for me because I suppose for me where I come with puppetry, that kind of Punch and Judy thing, and then, you know, when I was young, puppetry was kind of slightly, sort of like in the kind of children's entertainment ghetto. I think partly there was a kind of period of time with Complicity and myself and Fallon McDermott and Improbable, we did a thing called Shock-Headed Peter. At the time, the puppet community didn't like that because we had actors doing puppetry on stage, and they thought, what are you doing in our territory? Which, I mean, you laugh, but it was a big thing. But I think, you know, and now I feel you almost can't move for puppets. I kind of hate puppets. I don't know about you guys. I sort of love them. I don't know, love, hate. Because now I feel like every show has got puppets and people are training to be puppeteers. No one could train to be a puppeteer. So for me, it was sort of, puppetry, for me, I was drawn to it because it was like the punk era, you know, and for me, puppetry was sort of seen as a kind of gutter art. And I always felt like if you looked in the gutter, you might see the reflection of the moon. You might, you know, there's something beautiful in the fact that people were dismissing it. Now I feel it's sort of become this, people in the puppetry community, and I understand it, and I'm only saying this because I'm old and kind of finished, so I've kind of got a quiet. But, you know, people are fighting for it to be recognized as this high art. But for me, that loses a little something, and I like kind of the broken nature of puppets to some extent. I think the more sophisticated they become, the less interested I become. I like the kind of slightly, so these puppets were kind of like broken toy puppets. I made the heads, and I made this kind of ensemble make the bodies, and they weren't good, and I didn't want them to be good. I wanted them to be kind of like big and lumbering. So for me, sometimes I prefer that. I understand the kind of refined puppetry thing, but I'm very drawn to the kind of broken, I think. I don't know if any of that made sense. Yeah, maybe just click. I think the next few are just, they're all kind of newspaper things. I think there's about 4 or 5 just things from Satyagraha. Oh, this interests me. I'm also very interested in this. And this is going to piss people off, but I kind of love people who haven't done puppetry doing puppetry. When you do a lot of puppetry, I feel you can end up with that kind of I feel I'm often watching puppeteers, and I feel that they're saying, "Hey, can you see how invisible I am? Can you see how invisible I am?" And so I kind of like innocence using puppets, and I love this thing of making a thing where people are only got little bits of it, and the audience sort of put stuff together. So that was like a tangent. Maybe just click. I don't even know what's in here. All right, same thing. This is also from Satyagraha. That's obviously looks like a kind of fish, and the head is a fish. The rest of it's actually a body. You can see the two legs are sticking up. It's like an upside-down body, and I found myself very interested in this, where you work with a kit of what are seemingly unrelated bits, and when I'm making them, they are. I didn't make this image. I made all the bits, and so I like to go into a room. It's a bit like designing stuff to be a found object. You can use objects as well, but so I am thinking I'll make a fish head, and I'll make a body, and I'll make these. I think these are probably hands, with sticks. They are like hands with sticks. So I'll make these things. So as a designer, I get to kind of control that vision somehow, but when you're actually in the room, everyone who's in that room can then contribute to the imagery, and people will make things that I hadn't dreamt of. So this, I come back to this a lot in my work. Maybe just keep on going through. And none of this joins up in a way. Yeah, keep going. Yeah. Actually, this is another example. Actually, that's not, the photo doesn't really explain very well, but this was like I did something actually, I think earlier this year, maybe last year, at Juilliard for virtually no money. And it was opera students. And no one was really old enough to play this king character, so everyone played the king character. So they had different heads and hands and bodies. And again, it's the same as what I was talking about, this kit idea. I think what I like about that is that you can sort of float the objects in space, or they can be on the ground. There's nothing there, then suddenly there's something there. Suddenly it changes into something else, and then it's gone again. And you totally see the performers. But I guess I like the audience then ends up doing a lot of work. I suppose for me, probably that's, sorry, rambling. The thing I maybe find most interesting about puppetry, we did the show Shock-Headed Peter, the character called Conrad, he sucks his thumbs. The scissor man comes and he cuts the thumbs off Conrad, and we would do this every day. And in this show, and we would get the same reaction around the world, no matter what language people were speaking. When his thumbs were cut off, people would go, and then they would laugh. And I would think, what is that? Why are they going, and then why are they laughing? What is really, really happening there? And I think what was happening, it wasn't it was a kind of, it was a show that was, in theory, designed and made by the eccentric character in that show. So we didn't want beautiful puppets. We kind of wanted slightly badly made, badly painted set, and the design shouldn't be right. So it was a kind of design in the character of one of the characters. So it wasn't a great puppet. The puppeteers were not great puppeteers. They were my makers, and we thought we would do that show for 4 weeks. I said, I'll just be the puppeteers. And they ended up doing it for, 10 years, maybe 10 years. But they weren't great puppeteers. But I mean, this is probably obvious to everyone here, but maybe not to the general public. But, what's happening there is the audience is going, oh, that's meant to be a boy, and those puppeteers aren't meant to be there. So in a way, they're investing themselves in it. So I think when they cut the thumbs off, and they really were cut off, that we made new foam thumbs, and they were snipped, and the thumb would fly, and ribbon would come out. But I think people were gasping because they were so invested in the puppet that they physically, for a second, felt the pain of the snip. And then they laughed at their own investment. And I find that fascinating about puppetry. 2 minutes. But I also do think that, I mean, in some ways, there's a part, it's interesting, a symposium about puppetry, because there's part of me that maybe just flick through the images whilst I talk. What I love about puppetry is that I don't understand it. I'm still curious about it, and I have no desire for us to solve how it works or what it means. For me, I'd like that it remains a kind of wild territory. Anyway, that's my closing line.
It reminds me of my favorite quote by Peter Schumann. Puppetry is an anarchic, how do you say the word? Anarchic art, subversive and untamable by its very nature. And I'm all full of questions that I'm going to have to save until after we talk to Frank. But about the unpredictability and the messiness and the spontaneity being actually the core of the art, and being what generates the most interesting discoveries. So I'm really, really interested in talking more about that. But in the meantime, Frank Maudry is a creator of design-driven experiences that range from the intimate to the mammoth. He's an acclaimed inventor and designer of worlds, choreographer of people and mechanisms, and ritual expert and ceremony maker. Before founding Cabinet of Curiosity, Frank developed the education pedagogy for the Chicago Children's Theater, and prior to this, for 20 years, he was producing artistic director of Red Moon Theater, where he mentored hundreds of young artists, sculptors, puppet makers, set designers, performers, and educators from across the U.S. Frank has created art and experiences for Obama's White House, the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the Museum of Contemporary Art, LA Music Center, and Chicago Shakes. He's directed numerous Chicago-centered civic events, including the Art Institute's North Wing groundbreaking and Millennium Park's opening ceremony. His productions have toured the nation, Europe, and Japan. He's currently making his teaching home at University of Chicago. And in this festival, we got to see, in among all of these giant community puppet spectacles, tiny work. So thank you.
Thank you. These first images are just what it looks like to be in my mind all the time. So you can just look into my brain, black and white, dark, morbid, vacuous places. I'm gonna start by saying there was a couple years when I was younger where I saw Philippe Gentil and Dog Trope, the now deceased Dog Trope, and Shock-Headed Peter within a same brief chunk. And they were all remarkable experiences for a young creative person, but it was Shock-Headed Peter that changed the way I thought about everything. So I don't remember bad puppeteers or crappy sets. I have a very different recollection of the production, and I still tell people about it all the time. I thought it would be easiest to go third, but now it's not. And I promised Blair I would do this if there was coffee and I could swear, and there's no coffee, so I'm gonna swear more. I'm doing my best here. Oh, is it really? Oh, did you guys know that?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, I will behave myself. I'm a bit obsessed with puppetry, largely because of my interest in ritual, and what ritual means to the individual, the common person. And I'm constantly trying to define ritual for myself and others, and it's become a primary focus in my art making the past decade or so. And when I was a boy, I will tell two anecdotal stories. When I reached third grade, I was unable to read, and my mother was very concerned that I was stupid. And she took me to the doctor, and we left with a stack of comic books. And I remember him being like, yeah, I don't know, he can see letters, and he seems okay and normal, but I don't know, try these. And I immediately could read. The association of pictures and words worked for me. And from there, I consumed comic books and sort of required the image alongside the action or the illustration to make sense out of things. And comic books, my son jokes with me because I said to him once, comic books were my first language. And he finds that charming. Maybe you will too. And it's true that somehow I needed the association of those two things to make sense out of things. And that's very much what puppetry is to me. Words or ideas and actions and images composed together, and I can see story more distinctly through that route. Otherwise, I struggle a bit more. Like Josh, art was not a popular thing where I grew up, and I had never seen theater before. My brother, the perfect Italian son, still, went to high school to become a priest, so he was at a seminary, and my mother demanded that we go see a play that he was going to be in, and I thought, I don't want to, plays are gross, theater's dumb, I just want to watch cartoons and eat hamburgers, I don't want to go to a play. And she took me, and it was it was so amazing. It was an all-male version of Annie called Andy, full of boys who were going to be priests. And I was very confused. Afterwards, I was like, are plays only with men? Are they all just men? Are there women in plays? I just knew nothing about theater. And I still think that show is going to be my gold mine. When I remount Andy, I will make my fortune. Because it works perfectly. But I saw that play 4 times because I was obsessed with every level of it. Men who were going to be priests telling this story, dancing men who were priests. It just blew my mind. My brother did not become a priest. He became something worse. He's a marketing guy. No offense to any of you marketing people or religious figures. So that was a seminal moment for me because I enjoyed the storytelling. I love musicals. I don't care what the show is. If you're singing, I'm in. Because it's ridiculous and absurd. So I went to college, I failed out of high school, and someone said to me that they could help me go to college if I pursued the thing I wanted to do. And they said, what do you do on Saturday afternoons? And I said, well, I watch cartoons and smoke weed. And they said, well, you can go to college for that. And I thought, this sounds great. And they signed me up for Columbia College when it was an open whatever. You didn't have to have a brain in your head or anything. You could just go to school. And I studied animation and other things. Largely how to make and take LSD. That was my major. And I know we're live streaming, so I apologize to all of you for being an offensive, tiny old man. I don't think 62 is old, just so you know. I think you look great. I am hitting on you now live stream. I'm free the whole afternoon. So I left when I got through college. I had an interview with. I studied animation, and I was a very good inker because you didn't have to really draw action. You just colored in the lines, and I was really good at that, largely because of OCD and other things. But I had an interview with a new TV show. It's going to be the first season of a new TV show. You will have not heard of it. It was called The Simpsons. And they sent me the script, and I read it, and I was on the phone with Matt Groening and the head of the animation department. I'm pretending they're here. You can be Barry. And they said, so what do you think? And I said, yeah, it's just not funny. It's just not interesting. It's kind of dumb. And Matt said, what are you going to do with your life? And I said, I'm going to make art films. I'm going to make brilliant art films like Bashki and The Russians. And he was like, well, good luck to you, buddy. So I became promptly a pariah in the animation world because I was a jerk, a cocky jerk. Some might think I'm still one of those two things. You can decide which one. And I couldn't find work, so I got a job at a 24-hour home for mentally ill adults. The night shift from midnight to 6 a.m. I sat by a phone, and if it rang, a schizophrenic or bipolar person would talk to me, and I would go up to the room and try to calm them down. I was not trained for this work at all, other than being crazy myself. And I thought this job will be perfect. I can draw a comic book about these individuals. It'll be brilliant. And it was an amazing 3 years. And what it ignited in me was an interest in civic work. How can I be of service to other people? How can I, in this short time I'm going to get on this weird rock, help other people? And at some point, I really wanted to make art again, but I didn't want to make animation because it felt, the two-dimensionality of it felt distant and small and not of interest to me. And a friend said, you should go check out Red Moon Theater. And I met this person, Blair Thomas, who, this is a true story. Maybe everything else is a lie, but this is true, and it reflects this man's mind. He had built wings that essentially he gaff taped to my body and demanded I run, not demanded, but encouraged that I run up and down a busy street and try to fly. And we did this for like 7 hours until I was like, I don't know if we're gonna fly. Didn't the Wright brothers try? And he's like, but we can do it. It can happen. I will tell you all, I never got air. I'm a thick, solid, small dude, wide, heavy to the earth, kind of implanted in the earth. But I fell in love with Blair that day, and I fell in love with the idea of curiosity and absurdity. Because I think he knew we weren't going to fly, but the adventure of building the thing and trying it in front of lots of people on the street who were like, moron, idiot. I thought, wow, this is the first attention I've ever gotten that's positive. So I asked Blair, you know, how do I become a puppeteer? And he said, make work. I thought, oh, thank you, wise one. So I started to make puppet shows, mostly with discarded dolls and broken things and stuff lying around. And I was having fun. I was interested and inspired, and the word curious is really important to me. I found a sort of spirit of being alive in the activity, and that was not something that was common for me. I didn't feel very alive most of my life, but something happened in the act of puppetry. Now, to comment on something Julian said, I don't work with puppeteers. No offense to you, I get freaked out. I prefer to work with dancers because they understand time and space really well, and they're more willing to vanish into a moment than a puppeteer or actor who I struggle with wanting to be present, even if they say, I don't want to be present, I know my job is to not be seen, but they're always kind of lurking around the side of the thing. And I feel like, come on, just go over there. And I respect and enjoy puppeteers. They're some of my best friends. But dancers are just a little more comfortable for me because it's all about time and space. How do things move through time and space? And dancers have a uncanny relationship to both of those things. You're late. It's being streamed, so we're... So Blair abandoned me at Red Moon. That's a joke. And I wound up sticking around. Jenny Magnus, who's a Chicago artist, said, you know, just don't quit. If you stick around, there'll be no one else that people can turn to. I thought, well, that's helpful artistic advice. And it was kind of true, you know, so I just kept working and doing the thing that I did. And I made the cabinet in my young 30s. I think I was 35 the first. So you can, I guess, go to another slide. I don't know what that is. I made that show in my 30s, and we had a meager budget. It was mostly constructed by interns and other wandering folks. And the show was really hard to make because I was young and I didn't know much. And all I wanted to really do was make a scary puppet show. Could I scare people? Could I make a piece of horror? that unsettled people in the theater setting, and that seemed difficult but really interesting to me. And I was obsessed with German films from the early 1900s. My first puppet show was an adaptation of Fritz Lang's M, which is a very frightening film. Peter Lorre's first film as a child murderer, where both the mafia and the police unite together to stop the child murderer. So I made that. I adapted that into a puppet show with 3 men playing with dolls, just to see how much I could disorient the audience. That was my curiosity, and it worked. People were upset and disturbed, and but I learned a lot from it. So the cabinet was, I worked with Mikkel Maher, who's a genius writer, and he had come to me and said, oh, I just hate Red Moon shows. I never know what's happening. There's no characters, there's no beginning, there's no middle, there's no end. The ends happen like 18 times, and then really it's not over until you guys walk on stage and bow. Like, I'd really love to work with you to make a show that had a beginning, middle, and an ending, and had characters and conflicts, the basic things that make up story. And I was like, I don't know, that sounds kind of boring. But Mikkel and I started to work together, and the original piece was what I had pitched to Mikkel. There's 2 little stories here that I think are interesting, maybe because I find myself interesting. I said, I want to adapt The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, largely because it's a terrible film, but it sits between 2 wars and speaks to the impending German occupation and tyranny. And he said, oh, that's interesting to me. Well, let me think about it. I said, but I want it to be only 3 vultures telling the story. That's my genius idea. And he went away and wrote for a few months and came back and gave me the script, and we started reading. I said, where are the vultures? He said, it didn't work. I was like, who's in charge here, man? But the script was amazing, and I thought, this is really provocative and cool, and it's a beautiful story. And I love prose. I'm obsessed with beautiful language. So we set out to make the show. It was terrifying and hard to me. And at one point, someone came in and said, the show's terrible. You need to take all the text out. It's just too many words. So I said, okay, you're the boss. I took all the words out. Mikkel happened to come that day, and he watched it, and it was a disaster. It was awful. And he came up to me and said, take my name off this right now. And I was like, that's scary. I was like, but is it that bad? I was told there's too much text. I don't know what to do. And he said, put the text back in right now. So I went back to the cast with my tail between my legs, and I was like, man, I feel small and bad. But we need to put all the text back. So we did. And then the week prior to the show, I have 12 more minutes? I'm kidding. The week prior to the show, it was entirely unfinished. Mark Messing, the brilliant musician, hadn't seen a show to make music for. So every preview, we were jamming music into moments, and I was choreographing all day long to make something work. And the night before we opened, there was 10 minutes of missing music. And at the end, one of the audience members said, that was so provocative. That moment without music, that's brilliant. And I was like, no, we're just missing music. Like, I'm really happy that you feel that way. But I'm freaking out. So the show opened. I worked my ass off. It was a hit. It was Red Moon's longest running and most acclaimed indoor show. And when Red Moon closed now, some years ago, you all probably know better than me, I took the set to Blair's Farm to burn it as a ritual to say goodbye. I'm done with that past. I'm a different person. I want to create a new artist. And if the universe wants me to create this work again, it'll make it possible. So I'm going to finish with this. I rebuilt the set for a larger audience because we want to tour it. And I thought I was just remounting a show. This will be easy. I have the old show. I have a video. These 5 people just do what we did last time. Not at all. I learned 2 weeks in that we were remaking a show, not remounting, and that I had to get curious. I had to be interested in this new thing versus remake the old thing, and it was scary. And I gained 15 pounds, almost, and probably lost a year of my life remaking the show. But the interesting thing was you put new bodies in that space and new objects, everything changed. And I had to really search for the new thing, and I thought it was a cut and paste, plug and play, easy. We're just going to remake a hit. Everyone's going to be happy. It doesn't work that way, or it doesn't for me. Maybe it does for these guys. They're luckier than me. Anyway, I have to be quiet now.
The coffee.
He called it a reward, as if I'm a dog.
Thank you so much, everybody, for talking. You know, one of the things that really struck me the most, I think about the name of this series, the Ellen Van Volkenburg Symposium. Ellen Van Volkenburg, some of you know, some of you don't know, was this, Chicago puppeteer from a century ago and a bit, invented the word puppeteer. And had this sensibility of no puppetry training, trying things out, experimenting with what works, using a pastiche of inspirations from different places, and just sort of seeing what comes out of that process. And so that's the thing that really struck me. I want to start with some questions about the things that I think knit your work together. And the biggest thing to me is the way each of you talk about the indirect path and embracing messiness and serendipity as the work. I mean, not something that you append on top of it, sometimes in rebellion against other kinds of constraints maybe you've experienced in other aspects of your lives or how work is expected to go. But I'm just interested in, for each of you, that process of how serendipity is the thing for you and how you preserve that curiosity and you preserve that spirit of discovery.
I just talked a lot, so it has to start with one of you two.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, yes. I mean, I sometimes have to do some jobs to earn money. And so I do them, and usually they have a lot of structure to them. And usually something going wrong is bad news on that side of things. And so my refuge from that is usually totally in the world of serendipity, improvisation, joy of failure. Failure. Such a great, you mentioned a lot in yours. Yeah, that's where the gold is. Anyone else want to?
One of the things that I learned from Blair early on, and I think it's really critical to puppetry, is that you can design the greatest puppet in the world to do what you want it to do, but the puppet's the boss, and it decides what it wants to do. So you have to lean in to discover how it wants to do whatever it wants to do. And for puppeteers, that can make them rageful, because they're sure that it has to do this thing. So that means lots of broken arms and broken legs of the puppets, to be clear. And secondly, I think curiosity is like prayer. You must get on your knees every morning and ask the universe to give you that curiosity, just like gratitude. Please help me for 1 hour at a time be curious, because it's hard work. It's really difficult work because you're looking at the mess, because art is just a big mess until it's not a big mess anymore. Sometimes it ends just a big mess. You know, it's a process of surrendering and powerlessness, which is the human experience. And I think my girlfriend is one of the people watching this live stream, and about 2 weeks into the production, the remaking of the production, she said, "You don't get to have what you want. You get what you need." And it was such a clear, it was sort of a great, I don't know what the word is because I don't have the best language. It was a way of sort of encapsulating the art of puppetry, that if you're in the room taking what's coming, it's giving you what you need, and then you follow it. And there's a lot of fun hippiness to that. Like, life's a trip, man. Have fun. Like, we don't know where we're going. Enjoy. You have to abandon the sort of dictates of show up, get it done, and instead show up and see what happens, which is really a fun job if it paid better. So those are my thoughts.
I mean, yeah, I'm in the puppetry for the tens of dollars it pays. I like this idea of like surrendering to the thing, the process, the collaborators, the objects. And I think I'm not a good thinker sometimes. And if I like really ruminate and think about a thing, it often sends me in a direction that I don't want to go in, versus distracting myself or just kind of being really present with what's going on. Like, I find if I engage in something, like, most ideas I get generally come when I'm like making my body do something physical, like riding my bike really, really hard, and then it's like, oh, this could help it with this, or this could solve this thing. Oh, this is an idea that I think might work. And then trying to like find ways to incorporate that into process, so you're allowing for surprise to come, or a moment of inspiration in the room with people. And if you can like foster that thing, which is like so hard to do, and being okay if it's not working is also, I think, part of it, right? Like, you can try really hard and sometimes it's just not gonna pay off. But I think once you can like access that, I don't know, play space or flow state, where like effort is kind of matching your skill, then I think things tend to come forward a little more easily from whatever divinity is allowing these things to be seen and accessed. So, yeah.
It reminds me of what Julian was saying earlier about not necessarily being attracted to the stuff that's super polished, you know? And I was thinking, another thing that I think really ties your work together is this idea of, for the sake of inviting the audience into this, not only the fictional world that you're making, but this environment of serendipity and creativity, and allowing yourself to sort of surrender. The way each of you in these pieces that are featured in the festival, but beyond that as well, really embraces and celebrates the fakeness of it. You know, not at all trying to convince the audience that what they're seeing is real, not at all trying to sort of trick them into belief or anything like that, but just allowing the audience to really enjoy the not realness of it. And see how things are made, and enjoy even the little mistakes, like the microphone not working backstage, or the music not playing, or whatever. So can you talk a little bit about how you use deliberate and delightful fakeness that is often part of what puppetry is, but also is something that you emphasize? How do you use that to bring your audiences in?
When you were saying that, my head was almost going the opposite way, because in some ways, I think puppets are not fake. Like, I think, I pissed off the puppeteers earlier saying I didn't like puppeteers or puppetry. Now, but I don't like actors either. But in a sense, if you're watching a play and you're watching an actor, you kind of know that actor has a living life, and maybe that actor is going to get famous and going to go on. Maybe that actor doesn't want to be in that show. That is actually normally, I've found often, when you work, you normally work with actors and they wish they had a different part. But, really, they wish they also had a different director. We're in a better theater, and ideally television, You know, so often in an actor situation, they maybe don't 100% want to be there. And whereas a puppet always wants to be there. So there is no fakeness in a puppet, because the puppet, and this is why I think like puppets are actually much better than actors at doing like sex and violence, or, you know, because they're there and they don't go out partying after the shows. So I think the puppets, not the fakes.
Yeah, I think this is, you're reminding me of Penny Francis, who wrote a book about puppetry a few years ago, calls it the real, not real. On the one hand, it's kind of both, and yeah, I absolutely, I embrace that addition, but that the idea that, I don't know, I'm so fascinated with where the belief happens, you know, or where the embracing of it happens. If the puppet, I don't know, the puppet really is in the room, right? And the puppet really is coming to life before your eyes, really. But also, the process of imagining is sort of in the mind of the person who's watching. I don't know, it's a complicated and unsolvable thing that I think is what fascinates me most.
I agree with Julian. I don't feel like I suggested in any way that puppetry was a false experience or a fake genre. And I know that's not exactly what you said, but Roman Posca said this thing once. I felt like he said it to me, but he said it to a room of people, and I really admire Roman. He said, what the puppet feels, we feel, and what the puppet looks at, we look at. And that's a very simple foundation. And you know, when I'm developing a work, and the cabinet's a good example, there's a lot of conversation about driving intention. Like, you have to have an internal monologue that might be maniac. Like, I have to go kill this clerk now. I need to see you thinking what the puppet's thinking so that it's real. Because I want this experience that I'm surveying on the stage to be real. And what I appreciate about that is I like actors maybe more than Julian. I admire them.
I'm married to that.
But I don't like theater because I feel like I'm being told what to think. When I go to theater, I feel like they're saying, this is my character and I suffer in this way. And I think, I'm not stupid. I might be dumb, but I'm not stupid. And I remember learning in puppetry, you know, at the end of shows, people would be ghastly confused. I don't know what happened. I'm not sure what was going on. And I was with a puppeteer once who said, well, what do you think was happening? And then the person responded and said, I think this is it. And there was a trigger for me there where I thought, oh, puppetry is a dream language. I get to decide what's happening. And I'm deciding this is real, and I get to interpret it however I want. So if you think I'm wrong, Steppenwolf Court Theater, Chicago Shakes, who's telling me exactly what to think. No offense, I hope you guys are watching. You need a little more dream in your productions. I will fill in those gaps, but I think it's a very living experience, and I'm often convincing actors that what they're doing is real, because I believe that the puppet theater is a place where I can escape and be absorbed by broken, dead things doing real things. And that's enchanting, and as many writers about puppetry will say, uncanny.
You can use your own too. So.
Thank you. It's funny when audiences tell you a thing about what they just saw that isn't real. So for example, there's a moment where the puppet speaks to the camera into a microphone, and it's a solid piece of 3D printed plastic that does not move. Its lips are solid state. And the person said, when the puppet was talking, like I could see its lips moving and I could really see it. And that is just an endlessly fascinating thing to me, that we as audience members can see something that suggests a reality that then allows you to really see it even deeper than what is physically actually happening. And the puppetry does that so well, to be able to allow the audiences to interpret what these gestures are or these movements are or what that thing is. That can feel very real to people, even though this puppet's lips don't actually move. And I think to be able to play in that world of like, a puppet is controlled by people moving it around until they don't, and for an audience to want that thing to happen. So I think we try to play with this idea a lot in Kayfabe, where the puppet eventually is like, wants to break free and prove that it's actually like a real puppet that is like really good, and to be really good, I'm gonna fight these puppeteers, which is already like, how is that gonna happen? And then what does winning look like? Because if no one's touching the puppet, then what happens? And that is eventually what happens. The puppet, fights these puppeteers, and, this thing happens, and then the puppet is left in the middle of the wrestling ring without a puppeteer around it. And people are screaming, "Get up! Get up!" And there's no one near the puppet to make it get up, as if it will get up. And that is like, yum, 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 yum. Like, I will love that, because then I think we've done like a really cool thing as artists, where we've allowed people to really think that there is something alive there. That's the realest you can get, I think, right? With this idea of it being fake or not fake. And that part to me is like so exciting with puppets and with objects. To get that kind of buy-in from an audience, I think is really amazing.
It's so interesting that you bring up the example of interviewing the puppet and people saying that they saw the puppet's not lips move. Because I remember seeing, so this maybe just has to do with how I, Dassia, watch puppetry as well. I remember seeing that moment and thinking, this is genius, that the puppet is being interviewed and we're not trying to be tricked into the fact that the puppet's mouth is moving. So I had that, interestingly, really the opposite experience. And I think what I personally find most pleasurable about puppetry is the fact that when I'm watching it, I have to complete the experience, right? I have to invest myself in it. I have to participate, sometimes by holding up a sign that says Puppet 316, sometimes by just choosing to add in the rest of the pieces in something that's not trying to trick me. I guess that's what I was saying. So, anyway, I love how that happens in all of your work. I have time for one more question that's really a three-part question, in which I'm going to sort of ask you more specifically about your work in the context of what we've been talking about, and then we'll turn it over to the audience, because I know you will have questions too. So, just in the context of thinking about how design and juxtaposition are tools to develop some of the themes that we're talking about. Josh, I'm interested in your juxtaposition of this simple, obviously handmade puppet with paper mache, I think, over PVC. Is that what it is? For the arms and legs.
Yeah, it's plumbing foam
Yeah.
are the arms.
And instead of a heart, you see the puppeteer's hand in the middle of the chest. I'm interested in that juxtaposed with digital technology and commercials and this sort of like high polish, green screen settings and things like that. So I'm really interested in that tension and juxtaposition in your work. Julian, I'm really interested in the improvisational quality of paper and the kind of unpredictable magic in forming formlessness and sort of recognizing shapes that come out of it. It reminds me of like when you see shapes in clouds and you're sort of you're always imagining that there's a shape there, except that it sort of like brings the audience. So I'm interested in what that process was of sort of discovering the shapes in the paper. And Frank, I'm interested in the way that you use flat puppets and words spoken or written, shadows, three-dimensional objects, humans, juxtapositions of scale in this world that's black and white, right? And I'm just interested in knowing sort of how you made those design decisions for those moments in using all of these different forms in puppetry within the context of a single show. So that's a really long question, but I'm interested.
Answer all at the same time. Should we try?
That'd be great. Or we can answer each other's questions.
Right, everybody.
Yeah, I'll answer yours.
I
yours
will
mine.
speak on behalf
Yeah.
of. That would be fun.
That would be chaotic and great. I wonder if maybe, Paulette, we could like show that little video snippet at 2222. I think that might help showcase it, because one of the things that I love about puppetry is it is analog special effects. It is humans doing the magical thing right in front of you. And this is a moment in the show in which we interview the puppet in front of a green screen, but you see the sausage being made. So there's a composite that'll be happening on that screen that's like right at the top there. That is like the projection screen.
And sometimes you see it being made because you see the sort of projection of the projection.
Yeah, and then you can get like into real deep, levels of meta. But anyway, this I think is like a good example of using this idea of like digital technology and analog technology, and then when they combine to create this super image. But what you choose to look at when you're watching it is up to you. And I like that idea a lot as an artist, is do you want to watch them making the thing? And then when do you switch to go look at the made thing? And then when do you switch back? And then when that shit goes wrong, which happens a lot in our show, the technology sometimes does not cooperate. How do you respond to that? And I have a brilliant cast that's really great at embracing that, which happened to us a couple times here in Chicago. But here's kind of a example of that combination of analog and digital technology.
Let's now go backstage where PWE correspondent Hope Spots is standing by with Mr. Big Leo Energy, Dr. Kiss. Hope!
Thank you, Reverend. Yes, Hope Spots here, and I am standing backstage with the Randy Dr. Kiss!
At last, Dr. Kiss's Wrestling Revival Medicine Show has returned to New York City.
And you can pause it right there, Paulette. We don't have to play the whole thing, but what I think is really fun is being able to see these puppeteers, become characters, but the puppet is still kind of our main character. There's one person holding it, so it's just dangling in the air. So you can kind of like see, one of the puppeteers holding that puppet. No one's on its feet. No one's really like doing good puppetry necessarily, except for the top half, which is what the camera is catching. But you can kind of see all of that happening in front of the green screen and creating this like super composite image. So being able to like combine, I think, these old technologies, these handmade human technologies with some of these more digital ones, I think can create a different kind of spectacle that is just as intriguing, I think, as the spectacle of just the puppeteers working the puppet.
I can't really remember the question. It was about working with the paper.
About working with the paper. Yeah.
Improvisation.
Yeah.
And sort of formlessness taking form.
Well, one thing I suppose maybe like with my kind of designer hat, what I found often like working, it's complicated. So Improbable, there was 3 artistic directors. I was one, and I'd come from kind of weird sort of outdoor theatre, bread and puppety kind of land, like a company called Welfare State International, who like the brother or sister company of. I'd kind of come from that kind of angle. Phelan McDermott, Lee Simpson, had come from improvisation. So I came into that company with a kind of challenge because they would just want to improvise everything. And I was the designer, and you sort of had to find ways of kind of setting a world without closing down a world. So I usually, during the show, I would try and identify some materials because there wasn't really an idea. So I had to somehow pull the world together. So, we would do shows, just with baskets, or just with cardboard boxes, or just with paper, or we did 3 shows with Scotch tape, which we call sellotape, but you call it Scotch tape, yeah? We do. Yeah. And so you do things like that, and what that would at least mean it's going to look like something, but you also put something in the room that sort of anyone can contribute an idea from, the lighting designer, it's good for collaboration because it's not just in my head or Phelan's head or whatever. So I guess it kind of got into that habit. Or I do a show just with, like Shotgun Peter's just flat, painted old-fashioned scenery or whatever. And usually you'd start off with strict rules and then you'd kind of break them a little bit when you were working. So that's kind of, I would say, where the newspaper come from. And I can remember them. It was in the work already, in Improbable's work, and now, I'm no longer with Improbable and haven't worked with Phelan for, I don't know, about 50 years, but we're both still doing the paper thing. We haven't quite got rid of it, But I remember how it came to be. We sort of did a kind of meditation, a group meditation. We were working on a show that never happened, based on a book called The Mouse and His Child, and it's set in a rubbish dump. And someone, I think Lee, was reading a kind of meditation. We were meant to be dreaming, and it went everywhere, but I couldn't get out of the rubbish dump because in my head, I just saw this paper in my head, like coming and forming things together and forming. And I remember coming out of that, and in some ways, this is good collaboration. I'm probably too lazy. I would have just said, hey, I had this crazy dream with newspaper coming. I remember Phelan saying, well, let's do it. And we sat out a table and we did these exercises just with sheets of newspaper. And I think lots of people are doing it now. Those things end up in the air. Some people got it from Mars. Other people will have got it anyway. But at that time, no one had done that, or it didn't seem like anyone had done that. We didn't know of anyone doing that. And so it became one of our main teaching methods. And, we would, not afraid of reusing ideas, we would both kind of slap it into all of our shows. So that's how it came across. Then what's very interesting is as a puppeteer, you're on the wrong side of what it looks like. You have no idea what it looks like. You're on the wrong side. So it's like a kind of like a leap of faith. It's not, you're not even following in a way because you literally don't know what it looks like. But also I think paper I love the way an audience will transform it into really precious material after a bit. When it comes out, it's all crinkly and noisy. They know it's newspaper. And I've always liked using materials that people recognize, rather than expensive materials. And then the more you work with it, it kind of gets softer. Then it starts looking like this ancient fabric from China or something. Like it starts looking like something else. And constantly with the Birdheart show, which is just, that paper you'd get in an Amazon box or anywhere. People constantly come up and say, well, what is the paper? Or, where can I get that paper? And so you have that paper already,
I want to jump back to something you said earlier. When I saw Dracula here last week, I saw it with Tim Cusack, a writer and thinker about puppetry, and we were watching the show, and at the end of the show, the first thing he said to me was, "Did Lucy have a penis in this moment?" I thought, that's what I thought. How did they figure out how to give Lucy a penis in this moment? And then we decided that it was a phantom phallus that we had both just imagined for some strange reason. But it was a moment where, in terms of an audience experience, we had decided separately, but together we were seeing something that was not there. And I found that really provocative and fascinating. And I think, rarely does a puppet director or puppeteer get to experience puppetry as a pure audience member, because you're in a state of consistent judgment and jealousy or whatever range of emotions you might have. Those are two that I experience quite constantly. And now I'm going to answer that question that I think you asked me. About 5 or 6 years into making puppet shows, somebody said to me, I can't stand your work. I just can't stand it. You're a Luddite. And I had to go look it up. I was like, I don't know what Luddite means. Why are they saying that word to me? So, because I'm not very bright, I had to go and look up Luddite, and I thought, it's true. I'm a Luddite. I love being a Luddite. Like, why would you accuse me of it so negatively when the truth is I really prefer horses and wagons? It's interesting, and I prefer watching people do things, because largely I prefer craft. I'm interested in craft, and I'm one of those sort of sad guys who's desperate for craft to continue in a world where it's being murdered all the time. And I don't want to be too desperate or too dramatic necessarily, but it is a concern of mine. And the design thing for me is, I appreciate Julian's response, because I think, with the cabinet, the idea of making a black and white show that was an homage to a pretty terrible piece of cinema, other than it was assaulting the concerns of tyranny and fascism in a really subversive way, was what caught my attention. And we didn't know if it would work until we were there working with it. Because, why would you make a black and white show in a color world? Stop it, Frank. Put some paint in there. But anyway, they were wrong. I was right again. The thing in that was, again, with comic books, being raised on comic books and church, I feel like in design, my go-to is we're just making religious pictures from one religious composition to the next. And in animation, that's called the beginning and end of an image, and then you fill in the in-between. Then you have to draw the in-between. So if we can get those religious images right, the design and story will come. And I think that's a fairly simpleton way to approach directing. Just give me pretty pictures, and then later we'll fill in the spaces. And I think that's a design motivation. And I would also add that I'm a bit of a myth junkie, and I'm fairly obsessed with Joseph Campbell, and he writes a lot about Jung and Jung's ideas around aesthetic arrest. And aesthetic arrest had a huge influence on me, because they both argued that in a moment of pure beauty or virtuosity, like a dancer or a violin player, pure virtuosity, someone doing something extraordinary, the human spirit can abandon the mundane, the news, of which there's a shitload right now, excuse me, people online, poop load, and you can have a moment of revelation. You can actually be divorced from the self and encounter a new idea or a new person. And so aesthetic arrest for me is principle. How beautiful can we make the thing? How disgustingly beautiful can it be? And that is different than some folks, and I think it's a little pretentious and at times wrong-headed. But it's a principle. And that's where the like 2D, I was raised on winter pageants where it's like, now there's giant puppets, a little bit like Welfare State or Bread and Puppet. Now there's giant, but now there's little puppets. Now there's flat. Now there's 3D, and that's just fun. And I think that diversity within a performance is celebratory, buoyant, and joyful. And I think no matter our material, we're all dealing in celebration.
I love that idea. We're all dealing in celebration. The word Luddite I first learned from Bread and Puppet. They did a show about Ned Ludd and the Luddites, and I still remember the song. Still remember the song to this day. Maybe if any.
You gonna sing it? Yeah, come on.
You want me to?
Yeah.
Okay.
2 minutes.
Okay. Okay. 'Tis a gift to Xerox, 'tis a gift to fax, 'tis a gift to use our IBMs and Macs. But more and more technology does not true progress mean. Be strategic, know when to smash up the machine. All right, with that, let's turn it over to the audience for questions.
I think you should keep singing.
Do we have microphones that are going to audience members? Yeah.
Oh, they have to walk up there? I can bring the microphone to people. That seems like a long march.
Yeah, please, since it's live streamed, we really want to hear your questions, so come on up. Or we could hand you a microphone, you could carry it around for us.
Thank you.
No problem. Thank you all for talking. It was really impressive. I wish I saw everyone's stuff, but I saw the wrestler last night, Josh, and my friends and I were curious. The wrestler is alone, the only puppet in the piece, and it seemed like we were, as an audience member, wondering when is the other wrestler puppet that's the other wrestler going to wrestle with the wrestler? And it didn't happen. Was that something you had to resist? Like, obviously, it was a very bold choice to not have another wrestling puppet wrestle that puppet. And was just wondering how hard that was to avoid, or was it very easy to think, to not have that?
Thank you for that question. So context, in the show, the actual physical puppet wrestles an invisible character called the Moment. So the metaphor is thick. But practically, it's harder to have more human bodies around a 6-foot table. So if there are 3 people barely able to fit behind it to operate one puppet, to then put another puppet with 3 more people behind it with rings wrapped all around it, it would just, the design elements start to then feel more difficult. And I think it limits your ability to create dynamic movement because you're now negotiating, 12 arms and people trying to move and switch and trade. So you're only using bilateral movement when there's that many people, and it's harder to make these dynamic things that happen in wrestling occur. So practically, I think it's a little bit harder, and it actually echoes back to this actual thing that wrestlers do sometimes just for each other, like before matches and audiences come into the arenas. They'll go into the ring and they'll just put on matches against the Invisible Man. Or a broom is a thing that they will often do together just to cut each other up. But that's often a thing that they would use as a measure of how good a wrestler you were, is how good could you make selling the moves an invisible character is doing to you, or the broomstick, or whatever it is. So that kind of came to me in one of those riding my bike reveries of like, oh, I think we could actually do this, and then it gets us past this problem of like limited movement and too many people. So I didn't find it to be a hard thing to move past because I think I could justify it artistically, but I'm curious for audiences if that's like, you see this, belt come out, just a championship belt with it not connected to an actual thing. I am curious if you're like, no, boo, that's bad. I want to see the thing. Or do you quickly get past it? Because last night, a great example, the belt comes out and it's introduced and it's invisible, and everyone's immediately like, boo, we don't like that character. And there's no character there, it's invisible. And that is interesting to me. So, yeah, how people interpret it, I think, is always fun and interesting.
Maybe just chip in here, because I think this is really interesting about puppetry. So, like with Birdheart, people kind of want to know the same thing. Where's the other character going to be? But of course, it's totally down to practicality. Because we have a puppet that has no body, it's just a sheet of paper. It really needs two of us to give it life. So you can never really bring in another character without adding a puppeteer, which is, I love, because it means, yeah, you kind of follow the practicality and your narrative comes out of that. I know, for example, with Punch and Judy, so obviously Punch is from Commedia, but then he was a marionette, and it's in Samuel Pepys's diary about seeing Punch. So he was like a marionette. It was so popular that people kind of wanted to rip off this idea. And the cheapest way of doing that was one puppeteer, like in a booth with, 2 glove puppets. But if you're only like one puppeteer with 2 glove puppets, how do you get this off and get the other one on? And so this is where all the violence and Punch and the dancing. So they dance. Then someone beats it dead so that they can lie on the ground and they can slip their hand out. And so I find that a very interesting thing about puppetry. Is it's really just what the fuck can you do? We'll do what we can do, and I love how the narrative comes out of that. But anyway.
All right, additional questions. Come on up.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm actually curious about when you guys were talking about the puppet being the decider of what you can't control what the puppet is going to do or whatever. So I'm curious about that in relation to the building and the fabricating of it. So like, who is deciding the materiality? How are you deciding the shapes and all of that? Like, how much are you surrendering to the whatever is coming and making it, or what is that relationship like in the building of it?
It's a great question.
Thanks.
I'm a bit of a purist. I really like wood because it makes noise and it has weight, unlike some other materials. I also believe that you build it to break it. So the first few rehearsals are, how much can you destroy right now? What can we bend to the point of where it snaps so that we can discover both what it wants to do and then how it might want to be remade. So there's always a chunk of time left for violence, or a set for violence. Like, how much can the puppeteer do to harm things so that we can learn its limitations?
I also think the materials tell you a little bit of what it can be and do, and just kind of like following sometimes what the material is and not forcing it too much. Like wood is a lovely thing to work with because it is limited to what it is, but the grains will do things and it won't be cut a certain way. And if you've designed far enough and then you can't reverse the leg shape and turn it around or whatever, you just kind of like embrace some of the imperfections in the wood, and that can also be like really beautiful, or the natural colors of it, or the knots, and choosing to let them be seen or not seen. But I think the materials themselves, I think, can help the design finish in ways that maybe you didn't intend when you went into it?
I mean, mostly for me, it depends what the job is, but usually everything is about speed. Everyone wants something tomorrow, or so often I'm led by speed and simplicity. I mean, there's a particular glue was very common in Britain that bizarrely, as a kid, I won a competition, a collage competition. This company called Copydex, with the people running it. They gave me a gallon of Copydex. So as a kid, I had like this particular glue that works in a particular way. So it really loves natural materials. It loves cottons and loves your hair. It loves your clothes. Doesn't like man-made materials so much. And so I kind of, would lean towards that. But everything's different. As I said, earlier, I'm also very interested in materials that people recognize, so they can literally go home and do it themselves.
All right, I think you were next.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Hi, my question's about pacing. So I feel like things are getting faster and faster in storytelling, and particularly with the cabinet. You're taking a material that's from a long time ago, and I'm just curious, like, how much do you let the current style influence the production you put on, and maybe what you've seen over time in particular? Like, I know you put that show on before. Did you change the pacing at all, or have you seen audiences respond differently to the pacing? Because I'm sure there's like a give and take between the audience and the show, so I'm curious about that.
Fabulous.
The show that I made before The Cabinet was an adaptation of The Old Man and the Sea, and it was very pretty, but it did this. It was really monotone, and I felt like that was brilliant. That's what it needed to be. And I thought I was making a meditation on a novel. But the truth is, I just wasn't causing enough interruption in the piece. And I had to see it to experience that. And the cabinet was a response to that. Like, I need interruptions in the velocity of storytelling, because I think one of the traps of puppetry is that it tends to do this. It tends to be atonal. And it's a thing that young puppet directors like magnets. They think magnets will solve everything, but they are really wrong. Like, every time a puppeteer is like, why can't we have a magnet or a performer, I think, don't say that word in here. It's not gonna solve it. It's gonna stick to everything, and it's not gonna work. Well, we can agree to disagree on magnets. So, the interesting thing about remaking the show was it was originally 55 minutes, and this show was 63 minutes, and I didn't add anything. We didn't even add music. It was just, but it felt faster and more active, so I haven't quite answered that yet. It's fresh to me, but I think it's really important, no matter what, in terms of the way we digest media now is assaultive and awful. And puppetry is commonly a sacred form, so it is reserved for a kind of harmony that's very beautiful, but also dangerous. And I think the puppet director has a responsibility to interrupt that tone with surprise and assault and something different. And, people do it very well. Bread and puppet, which is a kind of style that stagnant's a negative word, but it is atonal in a really interesting way, but even Peter finds ways to burst onto the scene and shatter that tone and pulse, and that doesn't feel like it's dealing with contemporary media digestion. It just feels like it's necessary in the puppetry medium for it to work. Now, I like meditative pieces. I like pieces that feel like I can drift into it and wander away, but I also sometimes feel like the job wasn't finished.
Other responses, or should we go to another question from our audience?
Who wants to walk 70?
I think we have time for one more maybe two we can squeeze in. Yeah,
Someone's gonna
please
make
come on
the
up.
long dead man walking. You're almost there. It's like a marathon. I want to throw you water or carbs. Here's a pizza. You made it.
If this is the last question, then this is perfect. So, when you are designing a puppet, do you feel like it is done? When do you feel like the puppet is in a way kind of being itself in the way that it needs to be, like it is what it is? This, especially for Bird Heart, especially for that where you're making these kind of puppets on the stage, how do you feel like, okay, this is good, keep going?
But, I mean, Bird Heart's kind of like a funny one in a way. I mean, normally I would say, I really started off as a mask maker, and I'm still really interested in masks. And it's interesting because puppetry's had this huge resurgence in my lifetime, and mask hasn't quite yet. So look out for mask. I reckon mask is coming. But I know with me, so that's where I started. So I'm kind of interested in the heads. I'm not actually so interested in the bodies. Like there's people who are so much better at mechanisms and people who are way more patient than me. So I normally I normally make a head, and when I feel like I'm meeting something, then I try and stop before I spoil it. Bird Heart was a strange thing in a way though, because so me and Saskia decided we wanted to do something together, and the Hensons gave a little bit of money. St. Anne's Warehouse, there was like a puppet lab thing there, maybe a tiny amount of money or whatever, but yeah, the puppet lab, you'd kind of have to do work, and then you'd have to show work in progress. Now, I mostly work in theatre forms because if I don't have the deadline, I'm never going to do it. So this thing of having to show work meant that, Saskia would have to come to my workshop, and she'd be coming, and I'd be going, oh, okay, I'll make something to play with. So I would make literally things in 5 minutes. The main head was literally like a paper bag that I just kind of went, okay, probably less than 5 minutes. But we kept on ending up in this thing where we would get really attached to the things that were made like immediately. In my head, I thought, well, we'll make these properly at some point. But we were still touring, and it was tatty already, and now it's really, really tatty. So in that sense, that show, to be honest, I guess no puppet is really finished before the audience. It only exists. Certainly Bird Heart doesn't exist. We start that and think, there is no show here. There is barely a show. It's only 20 minit's slow, but it's only 20 minutes slow. Like if that was 2 hours, that would be unbearable. But I would say with that show, it's really not finished until the audience is there. And because we deliberately use magnets and paper knowing we'd be in trouble, it breaks in different ways every time. There'd never been a clean show. So we're kind of using that as a kind of provocation. But it means that it never looks the same. So in the case of Bird Heart, I would say, yeah, never finished.
I have two thoughts. One, oh, what it is to be young. And I say that because I think in my older years, I have learned that my mother was right, that perfection is the enemy of good enough. And that a lot of the time I look at a puppet and I think, and I see it in the younger culture now, like its hands should move. It should really walk. Its eyes should open and close. It should speak. It should be an automaton or a little robot. And I think that's a result of this digital misery that is around us all the time. But I do think there's a thing that it's an act of humility to decide this is good enough to tell the story. And that's a hard place to get to, and it's a very personal decision. And I've had, in the making of the last show, people be like, oh, it'd be better if this was like this. And I think, yeah, it would be better. But that's not what it is. This is what we have, and this is the time we have. Now let's pursue bravely in the darkness with a match when we need a torch. So, you know, I've never felt like a puppet's done. I always feel like, you know, Mary Zimmerman says this great thing that every show she makes is an experiment towards her final show. And Mary makes big, wild shows, but each one, these grand operas, is just a study for that next show. And I think of puppets as the same, like, oh, this puppet is an experiment towards the next puppet. What am I learning from this creature that will help me next time? Knowing that perfection won't happen.
I'm being told we're at time, but I love that we're concluding with the idea of pursuing in the darkness with a match when we need a torch. It's a wonderful place to end. Thank you so much to our guests and our organizers, and to you all for coming today.